"This is very sudden, Colonel Emsworth," said he. "This will disarrange our plans. I can't help it, Mr. Kent. Our hands have been forced. Can Mr. Godfrey see us?" "Yes, he is waiting inside." He turned and led us into a large, plainly furnished front room. A man was standing with his back to the fire, and at the sight of him, my client sprang forward with outstretched hand. "Why, Godfrey, old man, this is fine." But the other waved him back. "Don't touch me, Jimmy. Keep your distance. Yes, you may well stare. I don't quite look the smart Lance Corporal Emsworth of B Squadron, do I?" His appearance was certainly extraordinary. One could see that he had indeed been a handsome man, with clear-cut features sunburned by an African sun, but mottled in patches over this darker surface were curious whitish patches which had bleached his skin. "That's why I don't court visitors," said he. "I don't mind you, Jimmy, but I could have done without your friend. I suppose there is some good reason for it, but you have me at a disadvantage. I wanted to be sure all was well with you, Godfrey. I saw you that night when you looked into my window, and I could not let the matter rest till I had cleared things up. Old Ralph told me you were there, and I couldn't help taking a peek at you. I hoped you would not have seen me, and I had to run to my burrow when I heard the window go up. But what in heaven's name is the matter?" "Well, it's not a long story to tell," said he, lighting a cigarette. "You remember that morning fight at Buffelsbrut, outside Pretoria, on the Eastern Railway line? You heard I was hit." "Yes, I heard that, but I never got particulars. 3 of us got separated from the others. It was very broken country, you remember. There was Simpson, the fellow we called Baldy Simpson, and Anderson and I. We were clearing Brother Boa, but he lay low and got the 3 of us. The other 2 were killed. I got an elephant bullet through my shoulder. I stuck onto my horse, however, and he galloped several miles before I fainted and rolled off the saddle. When I came to myself, it was nightfall, and I raised myself up, feeling very weak and ill. To my surprise, there was a house close behind me, a fairly large house with a broad stoop and many windows. It was deadly cold. You remember the kind of numb cold which used to come at evening? A deadly, sickening sort of cold, very different from a crisp, healthy frost. Well, I was chilled to the bone, and my only hope seemed to lie in reaching that house. I staggered to my feet and dragged myself along, hardly conscious of what I did. I have a dim memory of slowly ascending the steps, entering a wide-open door, passing into a large room which contained several beds, and throwing myself down with a gasp of satisfaction upon one of them. It was unmade, but that troubled me not at all. I drew the clothes over my shivering body, and in a moment I was in a deep sleep. It was morning when I wakened, and it seemed to me that instead of coming out into a world of sanity, I had emerged into some extraordinary nightmare. The African sun flooded through the big, curtainless windows, and every detail of the great, bare, whitewashed dormitory stood out hard and clear. In front of me was standing a small, dwarf-like man, with a huge, bulbous head, who was jabbering excitedly in Dutch, waving 2 horrible hands which looked to me like brown sponges. Behind him stood a group of people who seemed to be intensely amused by the situation, but a chill came over me as I looked at them. Not one of them was a normal human being. Everyone was twisted or swollen or disfigured in some strange way. The laughter of these strange monstrosities was a dreadful thing to hear. It seemed that none of them could speak English, but the situation wanted clearing up, for the creature with the big head was growing furiously angry, and uttering wild beast cries. He had laid his deformed hands upon me, and was dragging me out of bed, regardless of the fresh flow of blood from my wound. The little monster was as strong as a bull, and I don't know what he might have done to me had not an elderly man who was clearly in authority been attracted to the room by the hub-hub. He said a few stern words in Dutch, and my persecutor shrank away. Then he turned upon me, gazing at me in the utmost amazement. "How in the world did you come here?" he asked in amazement. "Wait a bit. I see that you are tired out, and that wounded shoulder of yours wants looking after. I am a doctor, and I'll soon have you tied up. But man alive, you are in far greater danger here than ever you were on the battlefield. You were in the leper hospital, and you have slept in a leper's bed. Need I tell you more, Jimmy? It seems that in view of the approaching battle, all these poor creatures had been evacuated the day before. Then, as the British advanced, they had been brought back by this, their medical superintendent, who assured me that, though he believed he was immune to the disease, he would none the less never have dared to do what I had done. He put me in a private room, treated me kindly, and within a week or so I was removed to the General Hospital at Pretoria. So there you have my tragedy. I hoped against hope, but it was not until I had reached home that the terrible signs which you see upon my face told me that I had not escaped. What was I to do? I was in this lonely house. We had 2 servants whom we could utterly trust. There was a house where I could live. Under a pledge of secrecy, Mr. Kent, who was a surgeon, was prepared to stay with me. It seemed simple enough on those lines. The alternative was a dreadful one. Segregation for life among strangers, with never a hope of release. But absolute secrecy was necessary, or even in this quiet countryside there would have been an outcry, and I should have been dragged to my horrible doom. Even you, Jimmy, even you had to be kept in the dark. Why my father has relented I cannot imagine. Colonel Emsworth pointed to me. This is the gentleman who forced my hand. He unfolded the scrap of paper on which I had written the word leprosy. It seemed to me that if he knew so much as that, it was safer that he should know all. And so it was, said I. Who knows but may good come of it? I understand that only Mr. Kent has seen the patient. May I ask, sir, if you are an authority on such complaints, which are, I understand, tropical or semi-tropical in their nature? I have the ordinary knowledge of the educated medical man, he observed, with some stiffness. I have no doubt, sir, that you are fully competent, but I am sure that you will agree that in such a case a second opinion is valuable. You have avoided this, I understand, for fear that pressure should be put upon you to segregate the patient. That is so, said Colonel Emsworth. I foresaw this situation, I explained, and I have brought with me a friend whose discretion may absolutely be trusted. I was able once to do him a professional favour, and he is ready to advise as a friend rather than a specialist. His name is Sir James Saunders. The prospect of an interview with Lord Roberts would not have excited greater wonder and pleasure in a raw subaltern than was now reflected upon the face of Mr. Kent. I shall indeed be proud, he murmured. Then I will ask Sir James to step this way. He is at present in the carriage outside the door. Meanwhile, Colonel Emsworth, we may perhaps assemble in your study, where I could give the necessary explanations. And here it is that I miss my Watson. By cunning questions and ejaculations of wonder, he could elevate my simple art, which is but systemized common sense, into a prodigy. When I tell my own story, I have no such aid, and yet I will give my process of thought, even as I gave it to my small audience, which included Godfrey's mother, in the study of Colonel Emsworth. That process, said I, starts upon this supposition that when you have eliminated all which is impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It may well be that several explanations remain, in which case one tries test after test, until one or other of them has a convincing amount of support. We will now apply this principle to the case in point. As it was first presented to me, there were 3 possible explanations of the seclusion or incarceration of this gentleman in an outhouse of his father's mansion. There was the explanation that he was in hiding for a crime, or that he was mad and that they wished to avoid an asylum, or that he had some disease which caused his segregation. I could think of no other adequate solutions. These, then, had to be sifted and balanced against each other. The criminal solution would not bear inspection. No unsolved crime had been reported from that district. I was sure of that. If it were some crime not yet discovered, then clearly it would be to the interest of the family to get rid of the delinquent and send him abroad rather than keep him concealed at home. I could see no explanation for such a line of conduct. Insanity was more plausible. The presence of the second person in the outhouse suggested a keeper. The fact that he locked the door when he came out strengthened the supposition and gave the idea of constraint. On the other hand, this constraint could not be severe, or the young man could not have got loose and come down to have a look at his friend. You will remember, Mr. Dodd, that I felt round for points, asking you, for example, about the paper which Mr. Kent was reading. Had it been the Lancet, or the British Medical Journal, it would have helped me. It is not illegal, however, to keep a lunatic upon private premises, so long as there is a qualified person in attendance, and the authorities have been duly notified. Why, then, all this desperate desire for secrecy? Once again, I could not get the theory to fit the facts. There remained the third possibility, into which, rare and unlikely as it was, everything seemed to fit. Leprosy is not uncommon in South Africa. By some extraordinary chance, this youth might have contracted it. His people would be placed in a very dreadful position, since they would desire to save him from segregation. Great secrecy would be needed to prevent rumours from getting about and subsequent interference by the authorities. A devoted medical man, if sufficiently paid, would easily be found to take charge of the sufferer. There would be no reason why the latter should not be allowed freedom after dark. Bleaching of the skin is a common result of the disease. The case was a strong one, so strong that I determined to act as if it were actually proved. When on arriving here, I noticed that Ralph, who carries out the meals, had gloves, which were impregnated with disinfectants. My last doubts were removed. A single word showed you, sir, that your secret was discovered, and if I wrote rather than said it, it was to prove to you that my discretion was to be trusted. I was finishing this little analysis of the case when the door was opened, and the austere figure of the great dermatologist was ushered in. But for once his sphinx-like features had relaxed, and there was a warm humanity in his eyes. He strode up to Colonel Emsworth and shook him by the hand. "It is often my lot to bring ill tidings, and seldom good," said he. "This occasion is the more welcome. It is not leprosy." "What?" "A well-marked case of pseudo-leprosy, or ichthyosis, a scale-like affection of the skin, unsightly, obstinate, but possibly curable and certainly non-infective. Yes, Mr. Holmes, the coincidence is a remarkable one. But is it coincidence? Are there not subtle forces at work of which we know little? Are we assured that the apprehension, from which this young man has no doubt suffered terribly since his exposure to this contagion, may not produce a physical effect which stimulates that which it fears? At any rate, I pledge my professional reputation. But the lady has fainted. I think that Mr. Kent had better be with her until she recovers from this joyous shock."